But really, thank you so much for coming out. We tried to do this 20 years ago here. Now, there was a program done here even earlier than that. Someone will tell you about that. But my partner at the time at work, we approached the boss. She said, absolutely not. So now, things have changed, and we've got this program here. So thank you for coming out. We hope we can do it again, and we hope you can support it. UFOs, sightings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of lectures going on about it. We found two of our specialists in this area, and we brought them in so you could engage with them, talk to them. By the way, how many heard Coast to Coast last night? They had a pretty good program on. And they've got one Thursday just for the Coast to Coast followers. This kind of started for me in 1968. And I'm Glenn, and this is Maria. I don't have any sighting stories to tell you, and I won't be very long in introducing our guest, but for me, it was Chariots of the Gods. Anybody out there? It was the 12th planet. Anybody out there? Okay. And now I have about 700 or 800 books. A lot of them are out of print on this topic. I also, in 1968, after all this stuff, and there are so many people in here who are much younger than that, I ran into the books of Charles Fort. Anybody? I had no idea, and I was a teen at that time, and I had no idea that, I thought it was a joke, the flat earth theory and all the other things, crafts coming from inner earth, and I was a teen. I had nobody to talk to about this. Years passed and years passed. Now I'm an old man, and there are lots of people to talk to about this stuff. So here we can kind of sort of like create a community, if that's what you want. We have a place to meet, place to exchange ideas. Since we decided to do this program, I went out and drug up my old Charles Fort books. And boy, I had some fun reading those books again when we were preparing this. I am Glenn Woodside, as I said earlier, and this is Maria Sheridan. We're both parts of the Business Science and Technology department here at the Chicago Public Library. We decided to do this because it does cover technology. And as before, we were told that we're not going to do a program on little green men, but that's you know. So we hope that you enjoy the program. I'm going to go ahead and let Maria come up and introduce our guest to you. And Chariot of the Gods, how many hands again? Yeah, I was a young guy that year when all that stuff was going on. And I'm really glad I found that book because it did a lot of things for me then. So we'll go ahead and bring up our guest, and we'll start hashing out some of these things that have been going on. And remember, I'm a big fan. There's another program on Coast to Coast this Thursday, so tune your ears in. And one of our guests has been on the program and spoken before. And I have to be careful because it could have been both of them, but I definitely know that one of them were. Yeah. Okay, so thank you again for coming out. Our department is on the 4th floor, and we have tons of UFO books.
And a display upstairs. Before we begin, we ask you to please silence your cell phones. We'd like to thank CPL staff for helping to make this event possible. This program is also streamed on Zoom and YouTube Live. After the presentations, our guest speakers will take questions from the audience at the front of the stage. Yes. So we are very excited to introduce our two special guests, local ufologist Dr. Mark Rodeghier and Sam Maranto. Both have decades and decades of experience researching, investigating, and presenting their findings, and they're often consulted for their expertise on panels, podcasts, and films. Our very first presenter, Dr. Mark Rodeghier, is the president and scientific director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS, since 1986. He earned a BS in astrophysics from Indiana University in 1975, and then earned his master's and PhDs from the University of Illinois at Chicago in sociology. His work in the UFO field began with CUFOS in 1974, and has researched and investigated in a variety of areas, including vehicle interference cases, physical trace events, and abduction cases. Auspiciously, it's also the 50th anniversary of CUFOS this year. And when I first reached out to Dr. Rodeghier back in May, he let me know that he presented here 30 years ago on the Roswell crash upstairs on the 7th floor. So we welcome you back to the library, Dr. Rodeghier, and congratulations for all of your insights and contributions to the field. Please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Rodeghier.
Thanks, everybody, and how's that, right? How's the sound now? There you go. And thanks, everybody, and thank you to Glenn and Maria for inviting Sam and myself here to talk. As she just said, I was here about 30 years ago. Mark your calendars, 30 years from now, we'll do it again. So, well, there's so much to talk about. It was hard to hold it down to just under an hour, but I'm going to try. And really, today is unlike what it was almost yesterday in my mind in terms of the UFO phenomena. This is an apocryphal phrase that appears on the screen, right? May you live in interesting times, which of course is meant to actually be a warning. It's something that you shouldn't want to experience because it's supposed to be times are too interesting to live through. I don't think that's true with UFOs now. In fact, I'm really glad that I made it to where I'm at today because I'm now living through very interesting and I think very potentially hopeful, potentially fruitful times, when it comes to the UFO phenomena, what we can learn about and what's going to happen. But I'll explain my views on those things as we go along. Now, I know why I'm here today because I got invited. You might be here today because you might have had recent interest in the subject. I'm sure some of you have been interested maybe as long as me, but others might be more recently interested. And we can pin it down to an exact date that I'll talk about in a second, but it's a total sea change in what's happened. But of course, you always have to go back. We always start every lecture way back at the beginning, right? June 24th, 1947. The modern era of UFOs begins with the famous Kenneth Arnold sighting. And while I'm not going to go into that, what I do want you to notice is that object, and that's Kenneth Arnold's sketch, is not a disk. It's not a flying saucer, is it? You can decide how you want to describe that object, but as what has happened after he landed and talked to the press, he described the object as skipping across the air, as if it was skipping across water like a saucer. And that's what ended up in the headlines. And that's why it's called flying saucers, though it turned out that, in fact, people were seeing flying saucers back then in kind of an ironic thing. But now, I'm trying to follow Dr. Hynek's footsteps. You'll learn to coin phrases here. We're now in the modern era of UFOs. And just like June 24th, 1947, I know what day it began. December 16th, 2017, when something was revealed that even someone like myself, who's in the field, active, right, had no clue about before that. And I even knew some of the people that were involved. They were very good about keeping secrets. But if you haven't heard about this, on December 16th, 2017, 3 reporters put a story in the New York Times that, there's the headline, and the upshot was this. The U.S. government had had a secret UFO program. Now, that's incredibly impactful for several reasons, but one of them is this. Were the previous programs that the Air Force ran secret? No, they weren't. Badly run? Yes. Propaganda exercises? Yes. But secret? No. Of course, there have been rumors, we could talk about that as we go along, about true secret programs, but none of that's ever come out. This was a secret program. So, the Navy videos, I will not play them for you because I'm going to go crazy if I see it for the 500th time. So, but those are the 3 famous Navy videos that we've all seen at least once or twice or 1,000 times, which are, in fact, incredibly interesting, though dissatisfying in the end because we don't have all the data we need to be able to really understand them. And I'll mention that later. Why was there a secret UFO program? These 2 guys are because there's a secret UFO program. Robert Bigelow, who I know and worked with, and Senator Harry Reid, who I'm sure about 98% of you heard of. And whatever your politics is, I'm very happy that Harry Reid was very honestly and genuinely interested in UFOs. So Robert Bigelow is an entrepreneur. He owns Budget Suites of America. He's fabulously wealthy. And he's also genuinely interested in the paranormal. In fact, broadly, the paranormal, not just UFOs. In fact, these days, he's into survival of consciousness. He's 79. I think his wife died, and he sees the end coming for himself. But Bigelow, back in the 90s, was extremely interested in UFOs, and he had the money to make things happen. And he actually contracted with the center, the Mutual UFO Network that Sam represents, and a third group, the Fund for UFO Research, and put together a small research project that failed miserably. And so I always like to take credit for the fact that what happened next goes all the way back to those days in the mid-90s. Because what happened next was that after some pondering of things, he started the National Institute for Discovery Science. And they bought the Skinwalker Ranch. You've probably seen the TV show. It's in Utah. All kinds of crazy paranormal things go on there. Wolf creatures, interdimensional portals, UFO sightings of orbs, bringing, crazy health effects. I mean, it's just a panoply of things. If you want to read about it, there's the book that was written after they finished their research there. Well, Bigelow and his team finished their research there in the mid-aughts. And, but he didn't finish his interest. He just said, I've done what I can with the ranch. And Harry Reid had been secretly attending, in other words, not talking about it to anybody, Bigelow's internal meetings in Las Vegas. And so they talked about it for a while, and Harry Reid said, you know what, I can get a program going and grant money, money from the government, and we can actually do a study of things, including back to the Skinwalker Ranch, which he still owned at the time, and also UFOs, because it was a broad project. It was focused on UFOs. It wasn't quite that. And so OSAP was formed. OSAP is the secret program, the one that was funded, the one that actually did things, the one that looked into the Nimitz incident and wrote the report that no one's seen, and did a number of other things as well, including, as it says, subcontracted with MUFON to get UFO cases. And only one person at MUFON knew that it was going to Robert Bigelow's group and all of that, and then going to the government. But that was fine. Well, there's a tremendous stigma still attached to the UFO subject. Today, back then, 50 years ago, probably going forward, and eventually, and not too long, you can see from the dates, the program got killed. They had the initial funding, it wasn't reallocated. And so OSAP died. After making some progress, all of which is classified still to this day, which is kind of crazy. But somebody else picked it up. And I know many of you know this name, and there's his face, Lou Elizondo. So Lou Elizondo, and it turns out, is also why we're talking today and why there's such a sea change, because Lou took up this program as an unfunded mandate, as they might call it in the government. No funding, but they had the infrastructure in place. So let's keep going. And so he drew on various resources, and they managed to do something. What did they do, you'll ask me, Mark? I don't know. He won't talk about it, and it's classified. And we're going to return to this point later about, is it a good idea to have the government, and particularly the military, look into UFOs? So eventually, Lou, who, whatever else his faults are, is a really sincere guy who wanted to make a difference and really thought the government should be paying attention to UFOs. Eventually, he got extremely frustrated because he couldn't get his bosses to even have a meeting with him to talk about the program and potentially giving him resources. So he quit. And he quit and started talking to reporters and other people like Tom DeLonge at Blink 182, and that's a long saga that we won't get into today. And so he revealed the program along with another fellow I've met a few times, Christopher Mellon, who was an assistant deputy secretary of defense, and we ended up with the New York Times story, and away we go. But as I've said, these programs were all secret. While it took a while, shortly after the story came out, we could see the change occurring. The media was beginning to write stories about UFOs that were not always laughing, just 90% of the time. They began to interview and give stories on the aviators who were involved in the 3 famous cases and others. And 60 Minutes, of course, eventually did a story a couple of years later. So as time went on, the subject was becoming more respectable. And there are several reasons for that, but clearly, the main thing is that secret programs capture people's attention, A, and B, the New York Times and elite media do exactly that. They lead the media. And if the New York Times and others think it's important, then, it's kind of important. But the third thing is this. Things have changed from 30 and 40 years ago. Astronomy, they've discovered over 5,000 exoplanets. And as I'll talk about later, people in the scientific community, while they don't use the word UFOs, are looking for things that you might classify otherwise as you and I as UFOs. And so the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence, that it's out there somewhere, even if we don't know where it's at, that we haven't found it yet. And life is out there for sure. And that astronomers are talking about this. It's around. And you put that together with UFOs and you get this incredible interest that's developed. So things went on behind the scenes. Yeah, there's incredible interest, but there's no official interest, right? Scientists themselves aren't leaping into the fray. Hey, I can't believe it. UFOs, let me look into it. No, it took some behind-the-scenes lobbying by some of the people I've mentioned and others to convince our politicians that there was something to this. And so actions began. The real serious stuff began 3 years ago with the request that an organization be put together, which was called, as you can see, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. And they went on to be established. The Defense Department did this kicking and screaming. The Defense Department, to today, has no interest in studying UFOs, as we would think of UFOs, right? This unexplained, weird phenomena that could be extraterrestrial, but certainly is a scientific mystery. That's not what most of them are interested in at all. So, but Congress allocates money and says, hey, you got to do this. They do it, even if it's not maybe as well as we'd like to have them do it. First report comes out in 2 years ago, and is interesting because they say, we don't have a lot of reports, but we can't explain basically any of them. Our batting average is lower than the lowest Cubs batting average in history, basically. But something's clear from the way they're working. We think UFOs, and we say, oh, okay, well, we're going to have a UFO project. What did the famous Project Blue Book do? It got a lot of civilian reports as well as military reports. In other words, it got reports from all over. But these projects are looking for reports only, almost exclusively, from the military and official sources. So those 144 reports here, they only go back to about 2004, and they basically are concerned again with what I've said, which is military pilots, maybe a few other pilots. So that's very restricted. Well, in between comes AIMSOG. No one knows if that's the real way to pronounce it, what it was about. All we can say about it is that they were as confused as Scott Bray was here in the briefing. I tried to find a slide that would represent perfectly how poor that briefing was that they made, which was embarrassing to, it all counts, 2 years ago. Oh, sorry, 1 year ago. And so that led now to what's happening currently, because that was clear to everybody that things weren't happening like Congress wanted it to. So more legislation occurred, and now we have AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, with Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, a real physicist, running it, and more resources to do it, but still focused on military sightings at the moment, not on civilian sightings. And yet civilians make up the bulk of UFO sightings. I mentioned a second ago that they weren't, whoops, go backward, that there's been resistance in the Defense Department, like not funding them fully the first year, like not giving them the resources to put together a website even. So finally, after the Kathleen Hicks, the Assistant Secretary or Secretary of Defense, I'm blanking on her title, she personally intervened this summer in a meeting and made things happen, like a CEO. And so AARO now has a website, and they're moving forward here. But as I've said several times, still military focused on what they're doing. Okay, that's the military. Give me a second. So, civilians, right? I bet you everybody's aware of the fact that a couple weeks ago, right, NASA does their own report. Why did they do that report? Well, remember, why am I standing here today talking to you about these developments? Because of two guys, right, Bigelow and Harry Reid. Why is there a NASA report? One guy, Bill Nelson, the head of NASA. Yeah, there's other stuff going on. He's interested in UFOs. He takes it seriously. He pushed NASA to do this. Very small amount of funding. And it wasn't, of course, to study UFOs. It was to study how to study UFOs. Not too convoluted, but I understand why it was that. And that's fine, and it's very bland, and it's okay. But they had to cover their bases in the report, even though they didn't study any data, because they had to say, well, we know there's no reason to conclude that existing UAP reports have an extraterrestrial source, but you can't conclude that if you haven't done the research, right? So, contradiction in terms. But they were clearly not prepared in the press conference as well, because Some of you will recall that they said they weren't going to name the director of the new NASA office, and then 3 hours or 4 hours later had to name the director because they realized that was a public relations snafu. However, I don't want to criticize NASA too much because they're a civilian agency. And generally the report is positive. It says UFOs should be studied scientifically, which is right. It says we need resources to do that, which is correct. And NASA thinks it can play a leading role in this, which could be fantastic. Now, okay, we're doing history backwards today, by the way. We're starting with the present, we're going to work back, and then we're going to come back. So back, forward. So, okay, I've told you why all these things are happening and why people are taking UFOs seriously, people in what I call the establishment. But there's another factor. It's a factor that's huge. It is the elephant in the room. It's this. All those UFO cases. Those are the center case files, all scrunched together because we don't have enough room. And we probably have on paper 80,000 reports, and our computer file has more than that. Other groups, MUFON has a huge file of cases. So what I'm saying is this. Imagine that the Navy videos had been released in 2017, just 3 videos. And yeah, there's a secret program, but that's it. There had never been a previous UFO sighting in the history of this country. There'd just been, oh, these 3 Navy aviators saw this weird stuff. Would people think UFOs were interesting? No, of course not. It takes this. It takes this huge background of UFO sightings that have occurred, that are intriguing. Well, I'll talk about a couple in a second, that are the underpinning to what's going on now. But do you hear that in the news? Do you hear people saying that? No, because people are ignorant of history and the subject and all the rest. So I'll knock it over yet off the lecture. So let's talk about an official case, because there's at least one government that's been serious about UFOs, the French government, from way back in the 1970s. And they still have the group today. It's got a slightly different name, but it was called JEPON back in the 70s. And if you want to be impressed by a UFO case, if you want to say, this has to be mysterious, this can't be anything, obviously, either this guy is totally insane and he also fabricated evidence, or this thing really happened, whatever this thing was, right? So, October 21st, 1982, middle of the day, a scientist, a cellular biologist, is in his backyard garden, and he watches a small, you can see his sketch, a small object hovering over his garden for 20 minutes. He's so amazed by it, he just watches. Why didn't he get a camera out? I don't know. I do know this, though. There was a case that was written up years ago in a magazine called Flying Saucer Review, and fabulous magazine from the UK. And there was another case like this where the witness was around a UFO that was there for a long period of time, fairly close to them, and they had a camera. The investigators said, hey, did you have a camera? He got out of his car to look. And the guy said, yeah, I had a camera. So you didn't take a photo? Why didn't you take a photo? He said, I could have been standing on a pile of 10,000 cameras and I wouldn't have thought of taking a photo. Because he was so amazed by what he was watching. So this guy was the same way. It hovered there. It finally left. And after it left, the grass stood straight up briefly as it was leaving, which means probably there was an electric field there. It was investigated almost immediately by the French gendarmes who were involved with helping JEPON do its work. And this is called the amaranth case because there was this amaranth bush near the object that had withered and its fruit had burst. So physical effects. Completely unexplained, and you can understand why, right? Close up, watches it for 20 minutes, goes away, leaves physical effects. That's the UFO phenomena. Investigated officially, unexplained. But not extraterrestrial. We don't know, because there wasn't a sign on it that said where it was from and, this solar system, and right? So you're left with this real mystery. But it's this evidence that's really behind the current interest in the subject. So the first thing I did that was really serious at the center, I did a lot of stuff, but the first major project was vehicle interference cases that Maria mentioned when she introduced me. And this was published in '81. I just want to talk about this one case. So imagine your car is going to get stopped by a UFO, which happened in we had 441 back then. Who would you want to be the driver of the car? Oh, how about an auto mechanic? Okay, yeah, I've got one for you. So, Australia, 1976, 3:30 in the morning. He's driving to fix another car. And he's going through a small town, and all of a sudden his car starts to malfunction. No good reason. Well, he's an auto mechanic, so no panic. He gets out of the car. He pulls up the hood. He looks at the engine. He can't look at the engine. His flashlight won't work. It's a battery-operated flashlight, right? And it won't work. This is a really weird one. Even in interference cases with UFOs, having something operated by a battery not working is a little unique. But it doesn't work. So he's completely perplexed, and shortly afterwards, a bright UFO comes from a distance and just comes straight over him. And he feels heat, which witnesses sometimes do in these cases. It's very close, it's bright, and oddly enough, and this is another perplexity, the car tried to start itself after it was gone. I think it failed, but it tried. Gave it a good, college try. And then the vehicle had other problems later. So once again, the UFO phenomena. I'm going to skip the patterns in the cases, but I will say that we're going to now talk just briefly about CUFOS, because CUFOS is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And my 49th year, as frightening as that is, with the group. So when I was working on the vehicle interference reports, I needed files and a library and everything else. And fortunately, I had one in Evanston at the time where the center was located. Why is the center, why does it exist? Why did Dr. J. Allen Hynek from Northwestern start the center? He didn't have to. Why did he? Besides being, of course, dedicated to the subject and wanting to study it and all of that. He did it because of the 1973 UFO wave. So in 1973, in the fall, there was a huge, huge collection of UFO reports occurred. Diverse, very diverse. It lasted for a month and a half or 2 months. It was in the news, no internet, right? Nothing like that, but major papers, nightly news, everywhere, UFO wave. I was in college, read about it. It included this famous sighting, the Pascagoula abduction case. There's just been a new book written about that. Very intriguing case. Dr. Hynek actually went down and looked into that. And it also included this, the Coin helicopter sighting. That's a monograph. That green thing is a monograph that Jenny Zeidman, one of our board members, one of our best investigators, wrote. She was a student of Dr. Hynek's at Ohio State. And the Coin case is great. It's another one of these, wow, this is amazing. National Guard helicopter. There's an artist depiction of the helicopter and all that, but you can see Larry Coyne, the commander of the helicopter's non-artistic sketch of what he really looked at, which is kind of a torpedo-shaped object, and that beam coming out the bottom is green. It was green, which is what the artist did. So it's flying along through the center of Ohio, going north, and they see this object coming toward them, this light initially, right? And then it gets closer and it's green and all of that. And eventually the light shines into the cabin, of the helicopter as they're flying along. And in fact, they think that it might crash into them, potentially. These days, the military is worried about interference with aviators and all of that. That's one of their big concerns, that what are these things people are seeing in military training areas? Well, this was, of course, just flying along on a mission where this thing happened to them. So what in particular happened to them that, besides, of course, seeing this incredible thing, which is completely unexplained? Two things. One, they had a good old-fashioned compass on there, and it started spinning, and it wouldn't stop spinning. And number two, without any actions on the part of the pilot, the helicopter began to rise up into the air. And eventually, if you can read the testimony from calling the crew there, they all of a sudden realized they were over 2,000 feet higher than they'd started. But what's called the collective in a helicopter was pushed down. Down means down. They should have been going down. They were going up against the way the helicopter was supposed to be flying as they looked at it. So they managed to jiggle it around, which you always do. Well, let's just do this. And then they leveled off, and it was all fine. It never came close to losing control. But it appears that somehow, with that green beam, the UFO was actually controlling the helicopter. And there are cases like this where, and cars as well as planes and others, are seemingly affected in their motion by a UFO. So Jenny looked into this extensively, and to really put the capper on it, in that artist depiction, you saw a car on the ground. Yes, there were witnesses on the ground who saw the helicopter and the UFO. We published a monograph on the humanoid cases. So Dr. Hynek had gotten out of the UFO business with the Air Force a few years back, as I'll talk about in a minute or two. And so he realized that, you know what, I've thought about it. I need to form an organization that is run by scientists, focused on science. Civilian organizations are great like MUFON, but he wanted to do something a little different. And so he founded the center. Here we are today. We've stayed true to that, but I don't want to dwell on that. That's great. And we're still around, and we're going to launch a new website soon. But now let's go back all the way to the start again. U.S. Air Force history. Project Sign, Project Grudge, all those famous projects. Where did Dr. Hynek enter the fray? Why is he interested in UFOs? Because he needed the money. He was a relatively young professor with a growing family in 1948. At Ohio State University, the Air Force, famous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, that's where the project was based, Project Sign. And they needed an astronomer to go through their sightings and try to see if you could come up with astronomical explanations. And that's fine. We do that today. MUFON does that today. So he said, sure, I'll do that. He kind of enjoyed it. He over-explained things. I talked to him over the years. He's talked about it over the years. He's passed now, but he realized that he enjoyed too much explaining things, too much, so he stretched more than he should have. But still, that was his job, and he did it, and that was it. He did that, and he went away from the project. The projects went on. They're all code words. Blue Book doesn't mean anything. It's just Blue Book. Grudge is perfect, though, because Grudge is the project that happened after the Air Force turned down the recommendations of their own team that said UFOs might well be extraterrestrial. And they said, no, we're not going to accept that. We're going to relieve you guys of your duties and reassign you. We're going to put new people in there who don't care what they're doing, and we're going to rename it Project Grudge. Perfect. The Robertson panel occurred in 1953. Which, you can read about it. It set the tone for the public investigation of UFOs from then on until when Blue Book ended. And Robertson panel said UFOs aren't a scientific problem, they're a security problem. You can't overemphasize how much the Cold War affected how UFOs were viewed by the military, politicians, the press, and others. So they even wanted to keep an eye on people like us, UFO groups. Could be subversive. So Blue Book became a public relations exercise. Hynek stuck with it because he realized that over time, he realized UFOs were serious, that he had been misguided in his initial estimation, and that the UFO subject was serious, it was a scientific problem, and so he said, you know what, better me than someone else in this job. Eventually, the Socorro landing happened, moving ahead a few years, in '64. I mention it only because it had a huge impact on him and his colleagues, but it also was another one of these cases that has been talked about because it happened. Everybody agrees it happened. Debunkers, skeptics, whoever, it happened. The only disagreement is what it was. And there's nothing it could have been. Nothing. So a policeman in Socorro, New Mexico, which is not near Roswell, amazingly, but in the center of the state, south of Albuquerque, chases some speeders, hears a strange sound, so strange, he breaks off the chase to see what this thing is. Here's a roar there, eventually sees a flame, and eventually sees this. It's an artist's depiction, way better than Lonnie Zamora's sketch, and yeah, I think it's pretty accurate of what he would have seen when he first came over a rise and looked down and saw that, including an insignia on the side. There's two figures outside of it. They see him. They get back in. He literally hears like a hatch closing, and it rises up into the air on a flame, turns sideways, whatever sideways is for an oval, flies horizontally for quite some distance, and then rises up. We can't do that today very easily, okay, because there's no wings. There's no wings. So how did they do it in 1964? Well, nothing. Everybody's looked for every possible secret project this could have been. There's nothing. But, again, is it extraterrestrial? You know, one of the things at the center is that we always say we're firmly on the fence. So firmly on the fence that it's something that's stuck up, you know. But because we can't take a position on something because, hey, we're scientists. We don't actually have evidence that UFOs are extraterrestrial. But when you look at cases like this and the others I've talked about and a few others, you have to say extraterrestrial seems reasonable, doesn't it? Hynek's downfall. And the Air Force's downfall, and actually was a good thing. Everybody was happy eventually looking back, except for one point about that, which is what Condon and his team wrote. So, huge series of sightings occurred in Michigan. They led to congressional hearings. It's called the Michigan swamp gas episode. Hynek coined that term to try to explain things because the Air Force pressured him to come up with an explanation. He regretted it the minute it came out of his mouth. You know, you say stuff and say, why did I just say that? That's pretty much what happened. But it's entered the lexicon, right? Something is swamp gas. But it led to hearings because congressmen said, you can't tell our constituents they're not seeing something. You know, the press was clamoring for this. So the hearings led to a funded project by the University of Colorado. And that, whoops, I didn't mean to go there. And that project resulted in the publication you see on the bottom right. A publication which said that UFOs are not a serious scientific problem, except they couldn't explain 25% of the cases they investigated themselves. But that report controlled scientific discussion on the subject until 2017, pretty much. Because, hey, science has spoken. The National Academy endorsed it. So that must be the way things go. Blue Book closed. Hynek wrote this book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. Yes, there are copies in the library. It was his magnum opus on the subject, and it's where he came up with the famous phrase, much better than swamp gas, one he was happy about, close encounters. He's the guy, Close Encounters 1, 2, and 3. That briefcase, that little guy always tried to get out of that briefcase. Always that little. And yes, Steven Spielberg did use it in the movies. Dr. Hynek got a cameo role. Yes, we did research for the movie. So when you see this scene in the movie, watch it again, where there's a guy that comes up to the railroad tracks, and there's things going on with the signs and all that. Those were taken from real cases. It's the movies. They put a lot of things together. It didn't happen in one case. It happened in several cases. So this is when the French government started their project. I mentioned that before, right? Late 77. Okay, not all cases happen all distant, vistas. They even happen here, Palatine. So a colleague of mine and I looked into this. 3 police officers, once again, interesting, good witnesses, could see it clearly. Yeah, it's close to O'Hare, but you'll see that not going to be in effect. But this case I'm talking about with you briefly, because not only I investigated it, that's good, but we had witnesses at 2 different locations. And we had the exact time because they were on the police recordings. And amazingly enough, the Palatine Police Department was extremely cooperative. Yeah, they joked around with us, but they were very cooperative, and they gave us the audio tapes. So we could sync everything up. We went with a policeman. We went to where they were. And so we know where they were when they saw this thing. We did the calculations. So basically, 5 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, it's November. And why does it start? Because police car is driving along and the road gets bright under them, around them, I should say. The road gets bright around them. So that's weird. And then they, of course, look up and they see this thing. And there's no sound. They call it in, of course. Hey, would somebody else go out and look? Somebody else goes out and look. They see it. Later, we checked with O'Hare and Glenview Naval Air Station, those of you that are old enough will remember when that was around. And no, nobody had anything up at that time. If you want to go to Palatine and see where it happened, that's, there you go. And we were able to calculate that it was moving slowly, and this is where it was at a certain time, and it was 700 or 800 feet high. It was too low to be in the flight path to land at O'Hare at that distance in Palatine. And of course, not only that, it looked like this, which is nothing, of course. And we eventually, 26 miles an hour too slow, not a helicopter, no sound, nothing. We eventually could pinpoint it landed in Bussey Woods, and we went there and looked around crazily and of course found nothing. But the point is, here's a sighting, big city area, suburbs, good witnesses, good evidence. There you go. That's the UFO phenomena. Dr. Hynek passed away in '86. I took over. Somehow I managed to stay in charge. They're nipping at my heels, but I fight them off. And right after that, we got into Roswell, right? No UFO lecture can occur without at least mentioning the word Roswell, but we'll do more than mention it. Dr. Hynek did not believe in UFO crashes. Neither did I. Neither did any of us at CUFOS. We listened to the stories, but we didn't really think there was good evidence for them. But then this Roswell thing came about, and we had a couple of guys who we trusted who went and talked to some of the witnesses. And it sounded like, this guy Jesse Marcel, these guys, they seem to be telling the truth. Well, one thing led to another, and eventually we became convinced that Something really had crashed. And once again, like the other cases I've talked about, like Socorro, everybody agrees something crashed at Roswell. There's no doubt about that, just a matter of what it was. So nobody had gone there and seriously looked for debris. And when we talked to the witnesses and they described the debris, it was like, there could be something left there. There are crashes now of aircraft, secret or not. You can go there and find small pieces of debris for crashes that happened 50 or 60 years ago. They don't pick up every tiny nut and bolt. So we thought that might have been true then. So we did it. 89, went to the site. That's our International UFO Reporter, our publication. That's my brother and me. If you can see the tiny little figures at the site, it's just as barren as it looks there. And we spent 4 days doing the standard archaeological dig, right? You get the screen, you sift the screen. We found a button. We found a button that appeared to be from a military uniform. That was interesting, but it wasn't really exciting because we knew the military was there, right? There was a crash. The military went there, and nobody disagreed about that. But we tried. And people have gone there since then and done way more elaborate digs and found hints that there might have been something that went on, but nothing, I don't think anything super compelling. But then there's the testimony. So I personally have interviewed 2 of the well-known Roswell witnesses. This guy's a little less well-known, Bill Rickett, Louis Rickett. He was in the Counterintelligence Corps. Many of you know the name Jesse Marcel. He was an intelligence officer. But there's the counterintelligence officers. And Cavett, Rickett's boss, is the guy who went out with Marcel to the site. Rickett was off. It was July 4th weekend. He was off. He came back, and Cavett said to him, Bill, I got to go show you something. Get a Jeep. We're going out. I'm going to show you something. And so they did. And one of those things included handling a piece of this strangest possible debris at a site that was being guarded by military men. I interviewed Rickett in his mobile home in Florida back in the 90, and with his wife sitting by his side, by the way, confirming everything he was saying, from before, because she remembered him coming home and talking about it. Of course, they told him not to talk about it. Of course, he came home and told his wife immediately. But you can see what it says. Piece of material, unbelievably thin, feels like metal, can't bend it. Can't bend it. Okay? So eventually, the last flurry of UFO activity with the government was the mid-90s and Roswell. Roswell became such a thing that the government was forced to react to Roswell and put out 2 reports. The one on the left and the one on the right. Had to come back for more with the one on the right. And the one on the right had to explain away the bodies that now people were talking about. Now, I myself am not so sure about the bodies, I'll tell you that. But the stories were plentiful enough that the government thought, yeah, I've got to say something. We've got to say something about it. It was a completely crazy explanation that crash dummy tests that occurred 4 years or 5 or 6 or 7 years later, way, way later than Roswell occurred, could be the confused memories of why these witnesses were saying they'd seen bodies in 47. So something happens in 47, somebody sees a crash dummy 10 years later, they conflate the two. Okay? This was our response to that. Who's the dummy now? So, makes no sense. Roswell, bottom line, it's still a mystery. Abduction cases, I'm going to just mention a couple of things. I always have more slides than I can get through. So I'm simply going to say this. I've talked about some cases here that I've either personally been involved in or interested, like the vehicle interference with the auto mechanic. Here's one of the best abduction cases, but you've probably never heard of it. Why is it one of the best abduction cases? Well, you get abducted. You forget what happened. You got to use hypnosis to look into it, okay? Well, that's not great. I'd prefer to have a conscious memory, but you know how it works. Most people don't have much of a memory. Do I want the witnesses to talk about it in the intervening 10 years or whatever before they come to a hypnotist and an investigator? No, I'd prefer they don't. Okay, buff ledge. So, on Lake Champlain, 1968, it's a summer camp, and all the campers are at the swim meet with the rivals, except for these two, with their who were not dating, just good friends. Now, I think it's true. It's sunset. They're sitting on the dock by the bay, no, by Lake Champlain. And by the way, the case was, not only did it have all those wonderful elements I mentioned, it was investigated by one of the best UFO investigators in history, the fellow who was the first investigator on the Benny Barney Hill case 20 years before that, or more. So they see a UFO, of course. Usually in abduction cases, something happens, you see a UFO, something like that. So they see a UFO, it's coming to the dock, and they lose consciousness. They lose missing time occurs, right? And they just wake up, and the UFO is going away. And yeah, it's this shape, this is your classic UFO. So the question is, what happens? Let me did I get one of it? Yep. I'll make sure I'm in slides here. Yeah, that's good. Okay. What happened was this, though. The camp is, as I said, near the end of the summer season. They don't talk about the experience after it happens that night. They're so stunned by it, they don't talk about it at all. The next morning, the guy goes to talk to her and misses her. And they never talk about it again because a couple days later, camp closes. 10 years later, Michael, a pseudonym, is having dreams and memories about this. And he contacts us. We put him in touch with Walt. Walt talks to him, and then they manage to find the woman involved, who's now married with kids, very reluctant to get involved. But she says eventually, they break down her resistance, okay, I'll do it. And so we forever talking about the case, they get hypnotized and they say what they say. Hypnosis, of course, is not a be-all and end-all. You have to be cautious under it. You have to look for verification under it and all the rest. Well, verification could be, if I manage to get this thing going the right way, this. So that's what the creatures look like on the left. But on the right, you see a scene depicted that each of them remembered from their own perspective, independently. She remembers standing in an oval room and looking at a table where he's being examined. He remembers being on a table in an oval room and seeing her standing there looking freaked out. So there's many other details that match. Not everything matches, right? Not perfect. But it's a fabulous abduction case. It's really, for that reason, one of the best. I want to make sure I get back to where we are today, so I'm just going to leave you. This will tantalize you maybe for the question and answer session. There's a huge mystery within a mystery about UFOs, and it's depicted on this slide because there are two eras in the UFO phenomena, not the history, not how we treat it. That's right, the modern era, the modern era. No, there's two distinct ways in which UFOs have appeared to us. One goes up to about 1980, early 1980s, and the other goes through now. And the difference is that I mentioned the 1973 UFO wave, right? Okay. When was the last wave after that in this country that was similar? I'll wait forever for an answer because there is no answer. It's 1973. There's never been another wave like that since 1973. But before that, there were several waves in this country and others that were like that. So that's a hint at what's happened. And you know, big triangles, giant boomerangs, right? If you follow UFOs, you hear about people seeing those. Well, that's one of the big changes that happened after that period. There's a boomerang from Westchester County in New York where this first was being recognized. And again, I maybe go into it later, but triangles were seen before that. It isn't like people didn't see. Everybody's seen everything over the years. Have people seen square UFOs? Yes. Have they seen cones? Yes. They've seen every possible shape you can imagine, including good old arrowhead boomerang sightings like this one from military personnel. That's an official document from the Air Force days from 1952 when they saw a formation of arrowhead-shaped UFOs. So, couple of things. I've got a timer here. So where am I at on time here? I'm gonna 3 or 4 more minutes, or how are we at? I don't want to go over Sam's time. Okay, so be quiet. So there, let me go ahead to show you a headline. This headline, right? I'm sure some of you saw this. UFOs, right? We're all spotting UFOs during the pandemic. And ghosts, and werewolves, and everything you can think of. Well, this makes it like it could be true. This is the recent trends and reports, but here is the actual trend and reports from MUFON and from the National UFO Reporting Center. And you see, it may be a little hard to see there, but that last year is 2021, and there's a huge spike in sightings in early 2021. And so we decided, I and 2 colleagues at CUFOS, to look into this, and we were able to show this is the reason. This is causing problems for ufologists, and this is causing problems for astronomers. The Starlink satellites are ruining astronomical observations, and they're causing UFO databases to be filled with sightings of Starlink. I did, by the way, early February, I think this year, my wife and I saw Starlink pass over Chicago. So if you go to the right websites, you can see it. It's nice. But if you take those out, it's flat. And this was to test the theory about what causes people to see UFOs, panic, things like that. Okay. Are UFOs intelligent? Well, I'm going to skip that for, I can tell you there's evidence of behavior that's intelligent. Okay, we talked about UFOs that are clearly objects, and now there's behavior. So let me finish with, of course, where are we with the subjects today, with what's happening today, okay? And meaning, what does the future hold? What should we think about the projects that have gone on or going on with ARROW, with the NASA project, with the Avi Loeb's Galileo project, and all the others? Well, I mentioned earlier that those OSAP and ATIP and others were secret, right? We still don't know what they did. We also know how badly the Air Force botched its years of UFO investigation. So if you have a subject that is scientific, by definition, could be more than that, but it's scientific, it's a scientific problem, who do you want to study it? Do you want the military to study it? They don't come to mind, do they, initially? They come to, let's blow things up, let's protect the country, let's do all that good stuff, but let's not have them do science. And that's the problem having military organizations do science, is that they're not equipped for it. That's not what they think about, and in fact, that is not what ARROW is really focused on, right? They're focused on their defense implications. So while all these things are great that are on the slide, right? That the government's doing this, the scientists, professionals are getting involved, still, yes, history could repeat itself again, as Lucy's doing to Charlie Brown there. So we're pretty leery about that. And we would much rather have Congress tell funding agencies, hey, here's a pot of money, let people apply for it like you do in any science, and let people start investigating UFOs. That's all. That's what Dr. Hynek wanted. That's what I want, my colleagues, and others around the world. We just want the subject to be not only studied openly, but really this. If I said to you the following, hey, here's a scientific problem. Okay, now, I want you to study it. Okay, great. You're going to have no resources. You're going to have no personnel. You're going to have a stigma attached to it, so people won't want to join your group. Go ahead, make progress. How much progress are you going to make? Well, nothing. That's been the problem all along. That's why the UFO subject has been mired where we are today. We've done some things, we've learned some things, but what we want is, and we're hopeful, and I will finish on a hopeful note, which is that I believe still, as Dr. Hynek did, that there's something profoundly important behind the subject. And that if we can just find a way to leverage the current events of today to begin to look into that, get more serious people involved, we just might have a chance of discovering what that is. Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, so right there next. Let me just get that. You want my time or something? No, I'm cool. Julie will. Yeah, and we will so far over. Yeah. Good. Julie, just want to make sure that your eyes have some time. So go ahead.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Rodeghier. That was very interesting. Our second presenter is Sam Maranto, who has been the state director for the Illinois Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, for the past 14 years and is a certified field investigator for over 20 years. Sam has been involved in 2 major mass sighting investigations, one in Tinley Park and the other in Rockford, as well as other investigations. His research into the UFO phenomenon started in 1964, and he had his first sighting as a UFO witness in 1959. Please give a very warm welcome to Sam Maranto.
Well, I'll be doggone. Look at all these wonderful people. I want to thank you very much for giving the time and coming out there, and time is the most precious of all commodities that we have. So let's see if we could have a little bit more of that wonderful information that Dr. Rodeghier started out, and hopefully we can finish up with a good Q&A. How's that? I first of all would like to say that I have a disclaimer up here because I'm going to be showing some videos and everything. And pretty much as far as the responsibility for what I say, the only person responsible for what I say is usually my wife. So we'll just blame her for anything. We will have images here that we're going to have some video. I hope you'll enjoy. We were talking about the modern, actually, what do you call this period of time besides a little bit confusing, but it is exciting, I would have to say. I would like to point out the UFO phenomena isn't something new. It didn't start in 1947, and it's just a matter of what you want to call these darn things. And nomenclatures and names and whatever you want to baptize them as being, acronyms or whatever. None of this really took place recently. It has been with us since the advent of humanity. What it is? Well, I think it's a multiplicity of phenomena. And like I always say, it's not about them, it's about who we are, what we are, and why we are. And if we had some crux to that problem or scenario, I think all of this would mesh as far as what it is they actually are and what they want. Now, an interesting case that I've always enjoyed, because so much there resembles so much we see today, is the Nuremberg case of 1561. Back then, they didn't have newspapers. They had things called broadsheets. And this broadsheet depiction of what was seen by a cross-section of the community. And by the way, I like mass sightings, which means over 100 witnesses or more, where you have a cross-section of a community. I think that's very interesting. And this is the case in point here. And what is seen is something coming out of the sun. It doesn't mean it's coming out of the sun. It means that obviously it is between the sun and the observers. So it appears that it is coming out of the sun. That is the same case in point as far as the October 13th of 1917 in a town called Fatima. And I think pretty much everybody here may remember that. It is called the Miracle of the Sun, and as many as 60,000 people were there that seen that. There was physical trace evidence and substantially more people than most events ever. Very interesting case in point. And it was definitely an aerial phenomena event. You could assign a religious connotation to it, or whatever, but it wasn't mass hysteria. It isn't something that was made up. It was a very genuine event. So was this. Now, what was seen here, as you can see as you're probably reading along, is a black triangle. And as Mark pointed out, black triangles all of a sudden become far more prevalent recently. And that isn't because it's something new. It's because I think many people are just realizing that it's actually something unusual when they were being told, well, it's got to be a disk if it's going to be a UFO or an orb. Maybe this is something like that, or, you know, it isn't my imagination. In other words, I think much of what we're told about something is to look like, we have this disassociation. So it may be something innate in how we relate to this phenomena culturally too. Well, here they have something that's a black triangle. We have these spheres. We have these what look like cylinders where spheres are coming out of it, and some of them are engaging what appears to be battles and crashing on the ground. The other interesting thing, please look in back of the sun over there and you see what looks like a let's say a boomerang per se, or something that looks like a chevron. It's very interesting because that's depicted there, but it's also being seen in UFO cases. And the other thing is, with large triangular events, we also have all three of these other phenomena associated with them, and I'll talk about that later. Soon afterwards, only a few years, there's another sighting of black and orange and reddish orbs in Basel, Switzerland. And here's another case of a mass sighting. Now, one person who did a great job putting together these historical accounts is Jacques Vallée and Scott Albrecht. Scott, I think, is living in, I think he's in Spain these days. And these are two legendary figures in the field of ufology. And if you get a chance, please pick up this book, Wonders in the Sky. And I recommend it strongly to the library to pick it up to add into their lexicon of what they have here in the ufology section. And by the way, it is ufology. It's not ufology. We don't F around with UFOs, okay? We study them. And the only people who call it ufology is SK Eptics. So we aren't that. We aren't it. We could be skeptical, but no, you know. Ufology like ecology. Again, what do these darn things look like? Well, like Dr. Rodeghier said, they could look like many different things. And for the longest period of time, what you're looking at here is a chart of those things that are more commonly seen and depicted. Again, back to the vernacular and the time frames on some of this stuff. You know, airships. In 1896, we had the airship wave, and a lot of those cases took place right here in Illinois, in the Midwest. And it all started out in Sacramento, California, but I could assure you, many years before that, we had other cases, not just in this country, but all around the world. Unidentified airplanes. You believe that? The term airplane was actually used in an unidentified airplane or unusual aircraft. That was commonplace in the 30s and even a little bit before that, after the advent, of course, of flight, the Wright brothers. Foo Fighters, World War II, ghost rockets, especially in I believe it was Sweden, and that was in around 1946 and 45. And then, of course, flying discs. There's a long history of that, and used by everybody from Alexander the Great to people recently referring to discs as far as a geometric form, and I actually like that better than anything else. Flying saucers, of course, Dr. Rodeghier pointed that out. And guess where the term flying saucer came from? It was actually dubbed right here in Chicago. Sun newspaper, and of course the date of that was June the 26th, I believe, of 1947, because the 24th was when Kenneth Arnold actually had the sighting. UFO, unidentified flying object. And another one, we got into the satellite era and the space era, the term fast walker was incorporated, and that was always a interesting code name that you'd see in some of these reports, a fast walker, or in some instances, even in one instance, Santa Claus, right? Santa Claus is real. UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, and of course today, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Now, the funny thing is anomalous phenomena, because we are talking about something that can be in multiple mediums. And I remember a conversation that Dr. Rodeghier and I had, and we were trying, I was like, well, what is it that is so unique about a characteristic of a UFO that nothing in our arsenal could fit that characteristic? He says, transmedium, being able to go in and out of water. These things go from outer space into our troposphere, into the water, and out and doing the same darn thing. Well, I'll tell you what, something like that isn't made in Detroit, now is it? Oh, look what we have here. We have an interesting map with nice big green circles on it. And where is that biggest green circle? Well, I'll be doggone, it's right here in Illinois. And this is a depiction of what would be highly correlated UFO sightings. And this was something a gentleman put together as a recent time scenario, and using that as the criterion to say that here we have a lot of mass sightings, and here, in what location are most of these, and are they recent? And what he was using was the National UFO Reporting Center by Peter Davenport's wonderful organization. By the way, he's one of the least praised names in ufology. He's a remarkable man, 80-some years old now. And he compiled it, but he wanted to keep it recent. And I'll be doggone, look at the list, the top 10. Here we go, the top 10 lineup. And we have Tinley Park, Illinois, 2004, the year of the weird, and I'll tell you more why I call it the year of the weird. And then we have Tinley Park again showing up in 2005. This is November. There's actually another date that's probably, I think, more significant, and that was the original date of 8/21/2004, which is, of course, year of the weird. I'm going to touch on the Phoenix lights. Again, Tinley Park again. Oh, they have it in here, August 21st, 2004. Now, those are the reports that come in. Again, submissions and reports. I wanted to give some clarity. MUFON gets some 8,000 reports a year. Now, a report is a submission. Doesn't mean that it's actually a UFO that was seen. In other words, something that's been verified and substantiated as being something truly anomalous. The vast majority of the cases that we get are identifiable as being something mundane, something just misidentified, something of celestial object. Recently, the Starlink, oh my gosh, those satellites, I think I had 35 cases in 1 month. So you get a lot of reports like that. That doesn't diminish the fact that we don't get quality reports, but that dwindles down to maybe somewhere in a range of 14 to as low as 3% of those things that are really tightly knit cases. But they do exist. The phenomena is genuine, but it's not in every case. Just think of, did you ever watch Gold Rush, where they're gold digging for gold and gold mine? Just think of how much debris, how much soil has to be moved before they even get a gram of gold. Same thing here. And you have to keep that in mind. Now, one thing that doesn't get talked about very much in here, but we will touch upon it at the end, is the case at O'Hare. That's starting to get a lot of motion again. People here, how many people have seen the information on the O'Hare case? Very good, so it won't be a stranger to you. As far as mass sightings, that's really what I like to focus on. Again, this is my favorite subject matter, and the cases that I did work on as far as mass sightings, baptism by fire, when I got in with MUFON, the first case I worked on, collectively with other individuals, was the Rockford sightings. And there were 13 dates of objects being seen, and this is mass sighting cases throughout the Rockford area, but it wasn't just concentrated there, it was all over the country, and very well documented. Video just came out during that period of time too. And here's just one clip from the one of the initial sightings in 2001. As a general rule, they're always in sequence of 3, and remember this, of 3. It's divisible by 3. In this instance, it was 12. And then, for instance, a few others you'll see 6, but always in these type of scenarios that may be related to large black triangles, 3s. Now, that's my eyeball, by the way. Can you tell? People are seeing red and orangish colors. Well, how is it their cameras are just depicting white? It's because they're so darn bright that the color gets lost. The term burnout, as far as that goes, is also used. It's just so bright. So we're not dealing with something as like flares on balloons or stuff that we hear, oh, it's got to be something prosaic like that. No, there's some bright things. During that period of time, these things started showing up in 2000, something really making its way into the commercial hands. That was the video recorder. Now, the funny thing about the video recorder, it really changed the game when it came to UFO investigations, because now we could see motion, we could see other details and characteristics. But, of course, they aren't $70-some thousand pieces of equipment, so you don't get that real high quality and video that you'd really like to get. But you know what? When it comes to evidence, if it's a scratch or a depiction on a pad of paper or a photograph, you get what you get. Now, what cracks me up is so many times I hear, but only thing we're doing is looking at fuzzy photographs or fuzzy images. Each and every day, lives are saved by fuzzy photographs. What do we call those things? X-rays. Who had that? Somebody had it out there. Very good. She better had it. That's my wife. She gets to hear this stuff all the time, right? So it isn't so much the quality of the image, but what? The quality of the person in back of it that's going to analyze it and figure out what in the heck is going on. Is that a gallstone? Or did that person just swallow too many pieces of M&Ms? Okay. Now, the next case that I think you knew about took place in January 4th, January 5th. I'm saying took place in January 4th, 5th because it was a longer time period than most people think or know. And that was down in an area called St. Clair County. And it was multiple cities, actually started in Highland, where a gentleman who owned a putt-putt, and I do love to play putt-putt golf, don't I, right, babe? Man, I tell you what, it is fantastic. We used to play putt-putt and watch get a little of this, watch that, play golf while watching a movie at the same time in the drive-in, right? 2 birds, 1 stone, and she always kicked my butt when it comes to playing putt-putt. So down in St. Clair County, they had the police running all over these, chasing these darn things. And it was a great case, got a lot of attention. And of course, the so-called SK Eptics decided that, you know what, it was Venus. Venus wasn't even up. But of course, that what made the news was Venus. And we know Venus wasn't flying all over the place. It wasn't even up in the air. But that's okay. One gentleman did work on it, was the past state director of Illinois, good friend of Dr. Rodeghier and myself. This gentleman here, he wrote a great book. He spent 20 years researching just one aspect of UFO shapes, and that was triangular UFOs. And that's Dave Marler. Dave Marler is a fantastic person, done some remarkable work, and started a new organization, and Mark is involved with that too. Here is, anybody watch UFO Hunters by any chance? Remember UFO Hunters? Good. You're one of my favorite people now, okay? I was a consultant to that on, I think, 5 shows or something. Actually was in 3 of them. Yep, that's me. The fat little guy in there, that's me. This is, I'm going to try to show some of this, but I may not be able to. This is not my computer, and but we'll try it anyways. Come on, cooperate with me. Uncooperative. I don't know why it's not working. This is not a good indication of things to come forward. Oh, well, let's pretend. What happens is, I'm going to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Push that button. That's Dave Marler. That's a water tower.
It's the first videographic evidence that's come to light in this case, and we have our hands on it exclusively.
Pay attention to the detail of this. You see here?
I swear to God, there's like some UFO stuff out here.
Wow, Mike, look at this one take off.
Holy heck.
What the heck? I don't...
Okay, I don't know what I just did,
To locate this
but
never before seen.
I screwed that up. Anyways, after I screw that up, I go to the next slide. Anyways, what happens in there, what you would have seen is Nancy says, oh yeah, there were these things in the sky, and there were a bunch of them. They were moving around, and then they asked, well, how high was it in the sky? The funny thing is, when you ask somebody how high something's in the sky and you're looking at night, you really can't tell unless you have something else in the sky as a point of reference. And I believe she said about 400 feet. Realistically, it was thousands of feet in the air. And what you would see, and it'd be something like this, but a hell of a lot better, it would be these multiple dots in the sky, 3 or 4 of them. Picture a pyramid in the sky, and there are, a base of 4, let's say, but a pyramidal type shape. And at the apex being 1, and then 3 at the bottom. And there's one at the top that seems to have some sort of illumination sticking out. And they were saying, yes, there's this light sticking out, or this something sticking out, pointing to the other one, and as it's like it's directing it to move in a, if you were to take your thumb and your little finger out and just move, keep your thumb stationary and just move it around like that. In other words, it appears to have some relationship in time-space with the other light. And that in itself dictates that there may be a solid object here. How's that? Well, Sam's mind's thinking maybe that light or that illumination is actually reflecting off an edge. And this case where you have this flipping over was exactly what we've seen in multiple images from Tinley Park. In other words, what was there may very well have been similar to what was seen in Tinley Park, mass sighting. Now, as I had mentioned before, there were multiple sightings prior to what was seen down in Millstead and Dupo. And one of the things that was seen came in a couple of years ago. I think it was 2018. And it's a MUFON case number 98706. And guy sent a report in, I called him up, and he said that in January of that year, in 2000, that he and his stepfather went down to Scotts Air Force Base and visit from some friends and whatever. The father was, or the stepfather was retired military intelligence, Air Force intelligence. And on the way back, they seen a huge triangular UFO above a field near a racetrack, a horse racing track. And I asked him if he would be able to draw it, and then I'd asked him if he would be able to figure out approximately when that took place. So during a process of question and answer with him, we were able to depict the time frame. I was able to take him back to a time and place of various things that he remembered. And he remembered watching television and that it was New Year's Eve. And so he was watching New Year's Eve, and he knew specifically that the day they went down there would have been on New Year's Day. And I go, that's great. It's great to know. He says, I go, well, why would you know? He goes, because my stepfather was kidding me about the fact that you better enjoy the night because the world's going to end tomorrow, because everybody was all panicking about 2000, remember? That the world's going to end, the computers are going to crash, dogs and cats are going to be shooting pool together tomorrow. It's chaotic, you know. And this is what was in his head, and he was able to recall the exact day. Well, this is the location that he's seen it at. They were going over an overpass, heading west to Missouri. The father seen this bright light in the sky, and he goes down the ravine, comes up, and he pulls over. The mother thought that guy was crazy. He's all excited. He's looking at this, pulls on the side, jumps out of the car. It's ice outside, slips, falls, hits his head on the car, gets up, and the mother's all worried about the two of them. They're out there, and the radio's all staticky. Cars are pulling off by the side of the road, getting in back of them, looking at this unusual object in the sky. This is the thing that he felt was most significant, is this row of lights in back of it. And it was just so big. It took up the whole field. It was massive. Then he says there's this light just that came down, and it covered the whole area in light. It was so brilliant, and it was just unbelievable. In each corner, at first there was one red light, and then it would switch off, and these red lights would go on. And he says, you know, when it took off, all of a sudden the beam condensed, and it went up, and when it did so, it made a whoosh noise. And it was so unusual. And then it moved across the highway. They followed it for a little bit, and then it started to head north. And when it did, he said it looked as if it collapsed on itself, and it just crumbled in and disappeared. Well, I found that very interesting, to say the least. And now we have another date of these mass sightings, or I shouldn't say mass sightings, these large triangular sightings in that area prior to the 4th. We also had a report come in on the 4th that was seen in Plainfield, Illinois. In other words, it wasn't just isolated to this area. And it wasn't just in Rockford, and this happens afterwards. And by the way, it was sightings out in the Quad Cities and other places around the world. Even the island of Man had sightings of these objects. Now, in addition to this large triangular object that seemed to be more of an isosceles type shape, which means the triangle that you would see, of course, to your right, long on two sides, short in the middle, and they would be seen or depicted with white lights in the corner or red, and then in the middle usually is this reddish type light, but not necessarily. There's variations. But usually in the accompaniment of these type of objects, and Dr. Rodeghier had pointed out as far as his study on these objects, they're usually seen on the outskirts of large cities. Well, this is a case in point that it's not far from St. Louis. Tinley Park is exactly that scenario in many of these other cases. Now, in company with these large black triangles are sometimes equilateral triangles, in other words, other objects. And then what was seen down in southern Illinois that really triggered things was an object you see right here. I don't know if you could see this right. I'm going to see if I could get this to, I don't know, a laser thing here. You see this one right here? See it? Looks like a house. That's what it looked like, a house floating through the sky. At first, people investigating it thought, well, maybe it was the back end of the isosceles. No, it seems to be an independent object. In fact, I brought that up to Dave Marler, and he said he had heard about things like this. And he added it in his book and in future research. Another thing is you have this very unusual type shape that took place in Tinley Park, which is like a crescent. Remember the crescent over the sun that was drawn in that depiction from 1561? Okay, but this thing is really weird. We had something like that seen in Tinley Park, which in the accompaniment of a large triangle, and then also orbs, orange orbs, which, and sometimes I hear about them detaching or attaching to the triangles. I actually hear stuff about that. Now, soon afterwards, a year or so, we had a mass sighting in, of all places, Carteret, New Jersey. Here you had people turning off on the turnpike, parking on the side, slowing down, taking videos, watching the darn thing. And NIDS, which is the National Institute of Discovery Science, Dr. Rodeghier mentioned that, Bigelow's organization, they investigated this and they got the radar data. And in that radar data, there were objects that were moving extremely slow, far slower than planes could fly without falling out of the sky. And then, of course, moving at speeds far greater than what we would expect them to in an instantaneous boom, just like that, gone, you know. And this is what was going on, and well recorded and documented in Carteret. Now, my wonderful wife, Eagle Eyes over there, we were on LaGrange Road at about 159th Street, 9:40 at night. On May the 2nd, 2003, it was a Friday, and I'm driving, my eyes are beat, and she goes and says, "Look, what's that?" She was pointing to her left, and I go, "That's Walgreens." And I'm like, nothing too exciting about Walgreens, you know. Maybe she had a coupon in her pocket. And she goes, "No, look up." So I looked underneath the visor, and I looked straight in the air and over the Pep Boys in the corner of this would be the southeast corner of 159th Street, LaGrange. And there's this orange orb. And this object would have been about the size of $50, would you say, hon? Something like that, an arm's length. It was awfully darn big. Sitting up there in the sky. And then around it were these flashes, like a sparkler, but much brighter, like arcing sparks of like a welder. And then from the bottom, oozing from it, are these droplets in the same color. And the color is like that of the sun rising or setting, that orangish red, that real incredible orangish red, exactly like it. And it's static in the sky. It's not moving. It's like if somebody painted a darn thing there. And then I says, well, just watch it. It's probably going to move. Well, as it did move, it went through the whole Doppler coloration of the whole spectrum of the rainbow. Went through all the colors. And as it went there, I said, Julie, just yell out to me when it's changing. Because is it a matter of distance? Is it just how we perceive things? Is it distance or is it perception? What is it? And as it moved off in a westerly, southwesterly direction, as it went, it changed colors. Now, again, it was static in the sky. The wind was blowing directly from the north, which is not the usual way the wind blows out here. You usually get a southwesterly breeze or wind. It was due north, and it was about 13 miles an hour. And it sat static in the sky. It wasn't until afterwards, in 2004, when we had some meetings, town hall type meetings, about the sightings in Tinley Park, that we actually met people who had that sighting, very same sighting on that night. We met a family who was at Kmart at that time. And there were 5 of them there, and they seen it up in the sky. And then across the street was a gentleman who was an employer, or a manager, of a men's store, and his employee. They were there, and they both seen it. So we had a triangulation of the observation. It was way up there, and the exact height would be hard to tell, but it was high enough that I had to look underneath the darn visor. And the thing that really got me is those days afterwards, in 2004, the year of the weird. In 2004, and I call it the year of the weird, we had our 25th anniversary and we went on a cruise. When we were on this cruise, the water, by the way, was like glass. There wasn't a ripple. Very unusual, very unusual. But as you may recall, in August of 2004, we had 13 major hurricanes. We also had that major earthquake and tsunami, December 25th, 26th, in Sumatra. Now, prior to that, on the 19th, some unusual things took place. There was a mass sighting of something sitting up over 30,000 feet up in the sky in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The radio was abuzz with information coming in, people trying to figure out what this thing is hovering over Minneapolis, St. Paul. Wasn't anything from wasn't a weather balloon. It wasn't anything tethered to the ground, obviously. Planes were seeing it, and it was being seen all the way into Wisconsin. Later that night, there was something that took place in Arizona. So here we are in the Twin Cities, and Julie, want to read that up? That's we get Julie to read. See, we get her up there eventually.
A very large unidentified white object hovered over...
You knew I was going to do that, didn't you?
Hovered over the Twin Cities area for approximately 10 hours. No one, including the FAA or the NWS, could identify the object. KSTP AM radio 1500 had callers regarding object in the sky, very, very high, but clearly visible. Must have been a huge object, some said, weather balloon, but according to eyewitnesses news, the FAA does not know what it was. After all, it was there in plain sight for many to see. It is video recorded, no rational explanation to this day.
You can take the next one, too.
Large object sits motionless in a 30-mile-an-hour wind. Many drivers in the area pull over. Multiple red illuminations are seen and recorded on videotape around the object.
So you have this object in the sky for God knows how many hours in Minneapolis, St. Paul. One gentleman, I remember reading his report, he was coming in, he was a businessman coming in to Minneapolis from Wisconsin, and he noticed this red light in the sky he was able to see at some distance, and he couldn't figure out what it was. So he's going into town and then eventually disappears. He gets into town, talks to his neighbor, and he says, well, has anything interesting happened while we're gone? He says, yeah, that darn thing that was up in the sky practically all day. He goes, I seen something. He goes, yeah, it just left. He goes, well, boy, I wish I could have taken a peek at that. Well, somebody did take a peek at it that he knew, and he said what it looked like was resembled the state of Alabama, which is a trapezoid. I'll be doggone. Now we got another way. Instead of Tic Tacs, we're using states, okay? It's like, boy, what's next? Well, here's a trapezoid. If you've never seen one, folks, okay, that's what a trapezoid looks like. Picture an isosceles triangle with the tip cut off. Oh my gosh, an isosceles triangle with the tip cut off. Interesting. Did you ever see Transformers? Hell of a movie, right? Well, those Transformers, things that break off, come together. We had a case up in Wisconsin once, and a gentleman, it was a very interesting case, that here you had this huge thing in the sky. He said it looked like a big pumpkin seed with the edges bitten off like by a shark. I'm like, here we go. Trapezoids, things bitten off by sharks. Okay, you mean it's like it has like gears? We have these indentations. Yes, exactly. And then he had a picture he sent me of a triangular craft with a notch in it. And it was like docked or next to it. I go, I'll be doggone. That's weird. I called up Dave Marler talking about that. Did you ever hear of cases where you have notches in very unusual locations seen in as far as indentations and triangles? And yes, definitely. I go, I'll be doggone. Well, maybe these things are pieced together somehow. Who knows? Just thinking, again, that's speculation. But what isn't speculation is that the gentleman said it was Alabama floating in the sky. Now, that evening I mentioned, something did take place in, of all places, Arizona. Again, remember now, on March the 13th, 1997 was the mass sighting of that humongous triangular boomerang-shaped object in Arizona. So keep that in mind. Well, this object, of course, the 19th of August, 2004, that you're seeing right here, was seen. In fact, we know exactly because we were out there and went to the location, investigated it. And the person who's recording this is an investigative researcher himself and a hell of a researcher, and he's worked for a government contractor. It's very good research. And this thing sat there in a 30-mile-an-hour wind, and oh, by the way, if this thing does work, there's going to be the F-bomb. So if young people need to cover their ears, or people that don't like the F-bomb, heard, oh my God, cover our ears, you'll melt. Let's see if we get this thing to work. I don't know if we can. "30-mile-an-hour wind. Traffic stopped. They're looking at this thing. And he says, it's near my house, which is about 2 miles away. There are mountains in the back, but those mountains in the back are really darn low. We know this exact location. Julie, we've been there, right? We know it exactly. We know what's back here. Here's the hills right here. Somebody says, well, it's a fire in the hills. No, sorry. It's a pretty damn big fire to reach up that high. And it's 2 miles away from the hills. and we know exactly where it is. Here's a house, here's a pole, here's everything. And you see these red areas here. One gentleman worked for Grumman, Grumman, and he worked at NASA. He was looking at this video, and he says, Sam, that's plasma energy. Can you imagine what type of mechanism would be in there to generate that much energy to create that? I have no idea. He says, a tremendous sum. He says, we were working on stuff like that at NASA when I was ready to leave. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing plasma energy. That's very unusual. It's huge. I asked Rob about this. This is his video, and he asked me to destroy it, I think. But anyways, you're looking at it, and you can see it on YouTube, by the way. There's far more detail. But I asked, well, what was it you seen? He says, what I saw wasn't aerodynamic, Sam. What I saw reminded me of something from Star Wars. You know, what do you call that? The Meridian Falcon? Something like that. He says there were things protruding from it. It was not aerodynamic. There were things sticking out of it, like superstructure, unusual. Now, during the same period of time, approximately the same time, further south, or a little bit before, in South Mountain, this was taking place, and there's a video that goes with this. We don't have the time to show all the videos that I have. But it was seen throughout the area. Again, this is the 20th, the 19th of August, and the 20th in the GNC. All of a sudden, some sightings were taking place on a ship. And it was during a honeymoon. A couple was out doing some stargazing, and they get out there, and they see these 3 red points of light moving across the sky. At first, they thought that was the nose satellite, which is a naval satellites, 3 of them, that fly in formation. We get reports on that now and then. That wasn't the case in point, not at all. That wasn't what was being seen. What was being seen, according to the wife, was blocking out stars when it flew, which means it's solid. This was being seen, and it was recorded supposedly in the captain's log. Again, the 20th. Now, the 21st, now we're getting home, right? Tinley Park, Illinois. The Air and Water Show took place that day, and some 2 to 3 million people were downtown. And they were still funneling out while this other activity took place in Tinley Park. Ozfest was there, and there's one reason to come to Earth, right? If you're an anonymous object and you need to transform some way or form to some place in time, where do you want to go? To Ozfest. There you go. Block parties were going on, barbecues. It was a beautiful evening. Like I say, it was nearly perfect. The only reason why it wasn't perfect is because I was asleep, not enjoying the darn thing. So, people are at the Air and Water Show. You know what these are? Blue Angels. Who was that? All right. Blue Angels are F-18s that are stripped down. They have to maintain altitude. And to do that, when they're maintaining altitude, they got to be at about 120 miles an hour. Keep that in your head when we look at other stuff here. Now, this is some guy looking out there, looking at the sky with his arms reached out. It was a beautiful evening, like I mentioned. And a lot of people were saying, well, what was being seen was the Summers Triangle, which would have been Deneb, Vega, and Altar, right? But positioned in the sky like that, which would have been seen because it was a perfect or nearly perfect evening. Sam wasn't there. Again, party, atmosphere, someone's having a good time. And some people were thinking what was being seen was accountable by one of those, either celestial objects, some sort of laser effects, too much drinking, okay? But that wasn't the case in point. The first image that I seen was from Peter Davenport, who had given me a call the next day. And the other thing about the next day, that very evening, now mind you, the week before, We had just gotten home from our 25th anniversary. And so far, things have been going pretty good for 25 years. All of a sudden, my little honey wakes up in the middle of the night screaming, "Did you hear that?" And I'm like, "What? You hear that?" And she's walking around the room saying, "Did you hear that?" Now I realize the warranty is up. Okay? I was worried. I didn't hear a darn thing, and it wasn't the phone because we shut it off. Shut it off at night because I don't need calls at night. If it's that bad, call 911, the police, or somebody other than me. Well, I get up, and the phone was just loaded with messages. And it was Peter Davenport, Dave Marler, newspaper reporters, you name it. They were calling, wondering what was it that was seen in the sky by hundreds of people. And sure enough, I had a few people call me, and I returned calls. But this was the first image that we got. And I enhanced it a little bit. I don't know if it looks any better. But you could see these are the only things up there in the sky, these 3 red lights. And that's what they referred to them to, the Tinley Park lights. But they weren't just seen in Tinley Park, as you just heard. Now let's see if I can, there we go. This is T.J. Japkin's photo or video. You may have heard it before, I don't know. The block party's broken up, everybody's going home to get their cameras. Now listen to what he says. You could hear the traffic, you could hear crickets. You can't hear this darn thing. And here's TJ filming it, breathing hard. See the motion? Picture a isosceles triangle moving different.
I got it! I got it on tape!
You think he was excited about that? Well, that is what you've seen if you ever watched UFO Hunters Season 2, the first one, Invasion, Illinois. That's how you would hear TJ yelling. We got a lot of echo going on here. I wonder if you could curb that, cut that back a little bit. There we go. Thank you. TJ was there with approximately 40 people, and he wasn't the only group. That wasn't the only group of people I spoke to, but it was the first group. And some of the other folks that I spoke to were in different locations, and we had a lot of people, a lot of witnesses. I spoke to probably 200 people. And as Mark Rodeghier would say, you just need a sampling, Sam. You don't need everybody's report. You just need a good sampling. And that's what we did. We got out and got a good sampling. We got measurements. We got triangulation. We got detail. That's called science. And that's what you do. You put it together to figure out where it was, how big it was, what it was may still be a mystery, but what it isn't a mystery. We're able to discount that. So we put our contenders in a list. We got a map of the area. And by the way, that one gentleman showing like this is a heart surgeon. And he's shown that that object that was in excess of 3,000 feet in the air, more likely 8,000 feet in the air, from point to point, from light to light, if it was a solid object, was in excess of 3 feet. That's pretty darn big. Now here is a layout of the area and some of the individuals involved and where they were looking, where we were able to get the videos. We have videos that correspond here. So we know when they were filming, where they were filming, and trying to correlate it all. That's very important in laying it out. And this is, again, just a sampling. In total, from the 2 nights that we worked on, it was the 21st of August and 31st, Halloween, there's a treat for you. And we had far more people on that night. But again, one of the first groups I spoke to was these guys right here. And I asked them, okay, I want you all to point where it was and where it left. Everybody cooperated except this little guy right here. And I knew he was going to be a troublemaker. okay, just by the look of his wheels. You know, he's got these wheels sported out. He's sporting, I don't know what it is. He's drinking and driving. We got problems already. So everybody pointed exactly the location where they seen it last, because that was very important, because now we had video from multiple locations. And we had an individual who took a recording further north, and they did that approximately the same time that it disappeared to these folks over here. And he was in the bathroom. I think he was just arranging flowers in there or something, or he could have been doing something else. But he had to go to the bathroom, I think, went in the bathroom, and he's looking out the window, and he sees these unusually bright red lights coming across, and he's like, what is this? He goes down, grabs his camera, goes outside, and he films it. And I don't know if we're able to see it. Okay, here we go. Now, he said approximately on the time. Oh, by the way, that was a 700 digital on this. The other one was a 400 digital. So we're able to get really in there, but it's digital. Now, this is, let's see if we can. He's talking on the phone to his father. Listen to the conversation. Oh, wait, no, this is, that ain't that one. That one didn't play. These are some other people. They were drunk, by the way. I guess this one does not want to play for me. Nope, okay. So we're going to go to baby Laura's party. This is her 1-year-old party. And yes, they were drinking, but the camera wasn't drinking. Okay?
Birthday party, we're watching the UFOs. Nice.
This would be from the west looking east. And he's calling all his relatives and friends, tell them to go outside and take a look at this.
We're not all loaded either.
And yes, that was Wipeout you heard in the background. Now his friends are calling back.
Hello? Hey, go look outside. Go look outside into the east sky. There's 3 red lights out there, and we don't know what they are. They look like they're UFOs or something. No, just look in the sky. They look like they're planes, but they're not. They're just 3 red dots.
Top 2 are getting closer and closer.
In the east. Yeah.
Picture your hand moving like this. They look closer and closer, these two, when you move them.
There's 3
This
red
way,
lights
they
in
look
front
like a
of them.
pillar
They're
of
doing
light.
nothing. They're just sitting there.
There, a pillar of light as it moves. This way.
You see them?
They don't move back and then go back this way, you know? Airplane is destroying them. They had to kind of maneuver to go back. But they also have blinking.
Yeah.
They're blinking. They're just staying still.
Oh, hell. Okay. Well, time's getting close here, and it's going to be short. But what I wanted to point out is just a matter of perspective. Same object. People who were close to it, and by the way, these things move like this. Like that, they move. Not flat or pointed at, it's blunt at this way is how you would see most of them move. They rotate, and we've examined these and rotated them back and forth and analyzed it. No, there's good reason to feel that there's something else here, that it's something solid. People who are directly underneath see arcing blue light in some of the videos and some of the photographs. We could see arcing blue lights. Some sworn they seen what appeared to be an artificial projection of stars above. Then there was a sergeant who seen objects coming in and out of it. Objects coming in and out of it. Not exactly flares on balloons then, you know what I mean? Again, this is the areas. Now, when it came to, I'm going to be getting done right now. Here's some of the images, some of the interpretation, and there was no traffic, no animal, there was animal reactions. Kangaroos were going crazy. That happens all the time. No, it wasn't kangaroos. It was, what were they? Coyotes. That's different stories. But anyway, a lot was going on. There's a lot of things. You get to read it, and if you're a fast reader, you'll figure it out. We had a lot of explanations. Aurora Borealis. Aurora Borealis is the go-to for all weathermen and drunks. They love that. Yeah, Aurora Borealis. And it wasn't the Aurora Borealis. And the other one said it had to be the Summers Triangle, D near Baltar and Vega. Well, if that was a case in point, we would have been dead because the Earth would have been spinning out of control. That's how they would have been maneuvering, okay? We got that. So F-18s were fast asleep. They were doing nighty-night. So was the B-12 or B-2 that was out there. On and on. Nothing can explain it. We have the weather data. We know the detail. And yes, there was a sighting in Melbourne, Australia. And guess what? Same darn thing, folks. 2 of them. Well, another one shows up in Tinley Park 45 minutes later, but that's rarely talked about at all. How do you like that, folks? I'll move quick. And on October 31st, the Halloween treat was we had a sighting. A gentleman seen the crescent-type craft that looks very strange. He called it daughter, was 5 miles north, and she was looking at the triangle object. She goes, no, it's further west. I see it. She goes, no, it's directly over me. He looked out of his truck. He parked his truck. He's standing underneath it, and he says it keeps moving back and forth, and there's this boom on it, and this like an AWAC plane with this, but it's a ball on it and a boom, and he says, it's weird as heck. And I did this, and remember I was saying, and people were saying something like the crescent moon in 1561 was in back of the sun or something they seen, and that's a crescent moon, and that's what I did as far as a depiction. Now, I can't go through all of them. I would like to get one, and I think you'll like it because it's with plane. This one right here is, I tell you, TJ was lucky. Nope. I don't know why this thing is doing that. Doggone it. TJ with the airplane, where is it? It isn't showing on here. It isn't playing. We have the airplane in the air with it, a very significant photograph. Well, here's one, you can see the airplane, but TJ's is superb. And here, can you see the object? Can you see it? Okay. TJ thought the airplane was actually cutting in between them. We have multiple videos showing that's not the case in point. And strangely enough, Bill Burns was able to talk to that pilot and said whatever that thing is, it was massive, and he didn't want to talk any further. So I'm going to wrap it up, and we're going to take some questions, okay?
Dad, speed up.
That was an alien invasion. Well, here is a very unusual picture of substructure. One gentleman bought a new camera, took a picture of the object when it came directly overhead, and he had a high telephoto. He went on it, and he says, there were things hanging from it, like I mentioned before, substructure, and his camera died, which happens all the time when you're near one of these objects real close. It'll kill your equipment. And his brand new camera was destroyed, but this is what he got before it happened. These are my enhancements. Now, talking to the gentleman Rob out in Arizona, he said that object here, this thing here, he knows what it is because he's seen one up close and personal, and this area of this object is approximately 125 feet. It looks like a pincer, and it's on a boom. Very unusual. Remember the gentleman talking about something about a boom? Then I had another case in Gridley, Illinois, and I showed them video, and they said, I know exactly what that thing is, and there's all sorts of appendages, things sticking out here. These were the lights, this is the drawing, and both the mother and daughter knew exactly what it was, and to them, they've seen it many times. Wausau, Wisconsin, a gentleman seen the very same object, and in fact, he called me up, he says, you're the guy on television? I don't know what the hell you're looking at, but maybe it's me. And he says, that isn't 3 separate lights, it's one huge, massive, triangular isosceles object. He was looking at weather reports, and I was working for NOAA, and comes up, walks on Rib Mountain up this big tower, a fire tower, and he's looking at this thing directly over him. He's getting electrical shocks all over, and he sees something fly out of it. Actually flew over some trucks, stopped the truck, lights went off. Then this thing shoots back up inside there, and it made an unusual sound, a sound that I can't repeat because just in case you have one of these things seen, you want to make sure you're seeing the same damn thing. So this guy goes home and he's shaking, right? This thing took off at god-awful speed, and he goes home and he's hungry, and he reaches to the sounds like, we're playing charades here. Microwave, thank you. See how she bails my butt out? That's great. He reaches over, and as he touches the plastic handle, a spark so brilliant and painful comes from there that he was on the phone looking at it, and he says, to this day, I have that hole in my hand, in my thumb. His ring became magnetic, and I am done. Boom. I'll see you guys. We're going to do some Q&A. Going on here.
I'd like you guys to come to the mic. If you have a question, they are here for a little longer. So come on up and speak and see what we can get going.
Sam, come on, to the table. To the table.
To the table. I'm trying to shut this darn thing off.
Okay. So thank you so much for doing this. I think for a lot of people who are interested in this, there was this moment where they read about one case that was so undeniable, they just, oh, this is my passion now. Like, for me, it was Lonnie Zamora. And as the news comes out, I think the mainstream skeptics say, that's great, that's interesting, but I'm still waiting for the real smoking gun. And it seems like the goalposts move further and further each time. And now, especially with AI and image manipulation, I guess I'm wondering, what does that smoking gun that changes the mind of all the skeptics look like to you, or does it even exist? Thank you.
Good question. Let me start with this. He's absolutely right that there hasn't been, of course, a smoking gun. There's not even something super compelling to most people out there, you know, again, the establishment, like I use that word. Avi Loeb, who most of you know about at Harvard, who has the Galileo Project, to look for UFOs. Look for other things too, but to look for UFOs, has encountered great resistance from his colleagues and others about, you know, you don't have anything to really be definitive here. You're going skiing, you know, you'll be going behind your headlights, they'd say, you know, for evidence. So what do scientists generally want? They want really hard data. One thing about people at the center, and Sam as well, is that when I was younger, really younger, and I read UFO reports, I said to myself, like the mechanic and like the French guy in his backyard, I said, well, if these people were telling me this about anything else in life, I would believe what they're telling me. Meaning witness testimony is compelling. But to the point about, okay, but what's the smoking gun, what's conclusive, it's not conclusive scientifically. That's why I still don't say we're being visited by extraterrestrials or time travelers or whatever. I'm just saying that this is a big mystery here. So scientists want hard physical evidence they could study. And that's what they want. And until they get that, catch-22 though, because we don't have it because there's a stigma against studying it. And why is there a stigma against studying it? Because we can't, you know, there's no evidence. So it's a circle that goes around and around. You want to add anything, Sam?
I think the goalpost needs to be repositioned anatomically on some of these people. And I'm just telling you what I think. But as far as evidence, what we have here, they're looking for proof, and proof doesn't exist in science. It exists in law. It exists in some aspects of maybe physics. I don't think even there. But I know it does in alcohol, okay? But what we're looking for is compiling data. We're looking for evidence. And we have ample evidence to say without a doubt that we're dealing with a genuine phenomena. And it's not just it's multiple. So I say it's a multiplicity of phenomena. And there is enough residual evidence that you could state that something is genuinely there. Now, they want the ashtray. I know Neil's looking for the ashtray. He's also looking for black holes. I want you to bring me physical, okay, you know the song Physical, get up, everybody gets up, starts dancing. No, you don't need physical in science. You don't need that in all instances, and this is where I have an issue. You know, look at cosmology. There's more evidence in ufology than there is in cosmology. So at least evidence, data at least to work with, that it's grounded with something more than just simple equations or complicated equations. I think we are working at moving this into a science, and I remember talking to Dr. Rodeghier about that, and I says, what will it take? And it wasn't really what I thought I was going to hear. It was numbers and dollars. And you remember how many million it was?
Tell me.
300 million.
Yeah.
He says $300 million as far as about what it would take. This man knows what he's talking about.
Right.
And try and be as quick and as brief as you can, because we will have to truncate everything at 4:30. It's a union job.
Hello. I wanted to bring up the Malaysia flight that went missing in 2014, and the video that has just been disclosed. I don't know if you've seen it before, but it looks like the UAPs that you described, and they go in a circular motion just like you described. So I just want to get your opinion on that.
Stan, do you want to go first this time?
What was that? The what?
The Malaysia flight that went missing in 2014.
The Malaysian flight?
Yeah.
I had a call from Singapore when that happened.
I'm sorry?
I don't get calls from Singapore. I swear to God, I got a call from Singapore.
Oh, wow.
When that took place.
Oh, okay.
You talk about freaking you out. That freaked me out. As far as, I don't know, I'm not versed on a UAP being involved, but it's an awfully strange thing. You lose this plane. I would say send the IRS after them, and they'll find it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, thank you.
What? I'm telling the truth.
Thank you.
I was at one of these conferences, I'm not going to say what city, and there's somebody that's trying to get the archives of all the older researchers and try to make a public archive so all the newer researchers could go and study patterns of UAP sightings and events.
There should be an archive?
No, somebody is establishing
He's
it.
involved with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's called the National UFO Historical Research Center.
Yeah.
UFO-REC.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm on the board.
Yeah.
And it's based in Albuquerque with Dave Marler, who Sam talked about also, the triangular guy. And yes, we're putting together, Dave particularly is putting together as many of the older archives of retiring ufologists and others. And you know, it's going to be massive, and hopefully eventually it'll be a museum as well as a ability to go online. In fact, CUFOS itself, we've already scanned in about 70% of our case files that I mentioned earlier. You saw the drawers, and slowly but surely over time we're going to put them all online so that people can access and look directly at UFO reports. So there you go, it's happening.
Thank you.
Okay, before we end everything, Maria, are you in the auditorium? Can you come out? Can you guys give Maria a hand? She did all the legwork.
Thanks, everybody.
She did most of the legwork to put this together. So give her a hand. definitely before we leave today.
Thanks for your presentations, both of you. I know CUFOS was founded in Evanston, and MUFON originally stood for the Midwest UFO Network. There were a number of academics back in the day who took this subject seriously and were also affiliated with Northwestern and the University of Chicago. How did this region of the country develop such a relationship with the study of UFOs, and what is the state of that relationship today?
How is what part of you mentioned Northwestern and Chicago, and then I guess I just missed what's the, because the center did not have a relationship with, those universities.
Of course.
Okay, there were academics like Fred Beckman, but in fact, Northwestern was unhappy that CUFOS was being run by Hynek, and with the stigma back then. So it's always been a struggle to get academics to be involved, whether it's MUFON, CUFOS, other groups, NICAP, wherever. Again, the stigma involved. By the way, Hynek got back at Northwestern in several ways, but the best way was that, as I said, they shunned him. They said we're unhappy. They wouldn't give him office space for free, so we were in his house for a while and all of that. So everybody who was anybody came to see Hynek about UFOs who was interested. Margaret Mead, famous anthropologist, came to Evanston and talked to him, and lots of other, names of people like that you would know. So one day, a guy, Uthon was the former Secretary General of the UN. He was interested in UFOs. After he left office, he came to Evanston to see Hynek, and Northwestern got wind of it and said, "Hey, Uthon's in town. Can you send him over to see us?" And Hynek said, "No." He's here to see me. So, but, there are organizations now like the Society for Scientific Exploration, the SCU, based in Texas with Robert Powell in the group, the SUAPS, SUOPS is another, so academics are, but, it's always been a struggle to get, whether professionals too, you don't have to be an academic, you can be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, but, it's, there's no magic bullet, basically. In fact, like with everything, everybody's volunteer. I've never made $1 off the center. In fact, I've put more money in than my wife wants to think about. But the point is that if you work in a volunteer organization of any type, you have to find a way to keep volunteers interested. And it's a little more difficult for a scientific organization, versus one like the Chicago Food Depository, which a big fan of and support. You can go and put cans and stack food up and send stuff out. And it's boring but straightforward, and all of that. If you want to be involved in UFO group, yeah, you can do boring filing things away, but it helps to have some talents and skills to come in with. So.
Okay. Well, before we get to our last question here, I want you to give a hand to Leland and his group that run the auditorium. That's Leland, that's Michael, and that's Jim up there. And they make all the stuff in here work and do all the slides and all that stuff. So thank you, guys.
All right. Dwayne, Chicago, Illinois here. Where's a good site to watch strictly authentic footage like y'all were showing of UFOs without all the graphic recreations and stuff? Just good old footage that we can watch. Meaning all the, like, is there nowhere like where you really can, just a site, a place where you can just watch all the
videos or?
Yeah.
Video, you love videos.
Yeah, I'm one of the 6 video and photo analysis people for MUFON. And as far as a location to review that and appreciate it, I don't really know of many. There's a lot of them out that incorporate pretty much anything that may be watchable. In other words, they'll take anything that conjured up or hoaxed. That's not really what you want to look at. You really want to look at those things that have been really evaluated, something that appears to be genuine. So I can't really give you a place or location, but I think we'll have one soon. So maybe soon, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you'll find stuff. Just to add to that, you know, Sam showed the videos of the Tinley Park lights and then some others, right? So, yeah, it's hard to take photos with a cell phone, and that's really one of the reasons why we don't have good photos of UFOs and they're at night and all this other stuff. But those are videos, and there were witnesses who saw at the same time, obviously. And so, in fact, you can be a ufologist yourself. You saw that. You can think about what that might be. But the point is, you can take photos of UFOs in modern day, in videos. And, you know, there they were, whatever they are. So.
Yeah, that verifies the fact that the event took place, and there's enough metadata on there to pull out information as far as location, GPS, blah, blah, blah. It's not like the olden days, but it can be manipulated. That's why we like to analyze it. But yes, I mean, there's information out there, but you really need to have a degree of, you know, good sense about it too. But I recommend it. Yeah, look for quality stuff and good documentaries. By the way, you have a gentleman here. You have a producer and director of Aerial Phenomena, one of the best movies out there and documentaries. Randall Nickerson, please stand up. Stand up, Randy. Randall Nickerson. Aerial Phenomena. Watch it, and I think you'll be very impressed. The anniversary date was just passed. It was September the 16th, 1994. Zimbabwe. You believe that? And they say, oh, only UFOs are seen in the United States. BS. You know?
Okay.
Thank you, Randy.
We're done?